Happy Halloween, guys! So today I am doing a theatrical makeup look. It is Beetlejuice and today my model is Jack. Last year I also did a handful of some classic 80s 90s Halloween characters. Beetlejuice is a complete classic and it is relatively easy to recreate. I decided to use a ball cap, but you don't have to. Beetlejuice has quite a high hairline, so I decided to create a new hairline for Jack. I will link on screen the full tutorial on how to apply a ball cap. On this occasion I did forget to blend away the seams. I melted away most of the flashing, but I just forgot to go around and blend it into the skin. So the seam will be quite visible, but it is a theatrical look, so it's just a bit of fun, but it is a bit of a schoolboy error. Before I start makeup, I'm going in with the Kryolan Pro Shield Barrier Foam. This is a great way to protect the skin before applying any prosthetics or particular paint products that tend to stain the skin. If, for instance, we were using green on the actual face, this is a great way to be able to lift it. It just prevents the skin from taking on too much of the colour. As you can see, Jack's not a fan of the smell. On eBay, I bought this hideous mask. It was about £5. I needed some synthetic hair that was textured so it was easy to mould into place. And I wanted the base colour to be grey because the green would take really well on the grey, but it also would look more true to the movie colour rather than the photos you see of the makeup behind the scenes, because that was really quite vibrant, but once the movie was colour graded, the green was a lot more muted, so this was the perfect base. Using a small pair of scissors, I've gone around the mask and released each of the wefts of hair. To stick that down, I'm going to use Prozade adhesive, and I'm going to start off by applying some of the hair cut up to the back of the neck. Once the adhesive goes tacky, you can press the cut hair pieces onto the adhesive and it will stick in place. By the way, this is a flesh coloured ball cap which I got from the Makeup Armoury. You can see here I've not bothered to blend it around the neckline because the hair is going to completely cover this, so it's just a waste of time. So save yourself the trouble and just do it around the hairline, which again I completely forgot. So now I've done the visible hair at the sides of the neck, I'm now going in with one of the wefts of hair, and I'm starting quite high up because as the hair layers down you won't see the base of the head. Again, this is to save a bit of time, but if you are concerned you can start layering from the nape of the neck and working your way up in layers. I've used this method in a few Halloween tutorials and it's really effective. If you're interested in seeing those tutorials, they are my Joker from last year and my White Walker makeup tutorial, and I will link them on screen for you. Now I'm taking some of that Prozade across the centre of the head and I'm going to lay out one weft all the way across. I've pre-cut this one slightly shorter. The hairs are kind of grown out, shoulder length, messy style, so having this a little bit shorter is going to allow me to create texture at the back. I'm now applying another layer across the centre of the head, and this is going to be the thickest part of the hair, and then from here on it starts to get thinner as it comes further forward. When you look at Beetlejuice's hair, it also comes down past his ears. It's quite thick, but you can just see his earlobes, so I'm taking it down to just above the lobe, and then I'll put a tiny bit of hair just forward of this. I've laid some Prozade down at the very top of the head and I've cut the hair and I'm applying it individually in small sections to bring the hairline forward, and this hair's quite short. This section will be his kind of messy fringe that just stands up on end. Then I'm taking the rest of the hair and just roughly cutting it in chunky sections. That way we can manipulate the very ends of it to stick out in different directions and just create a bit of an ununiformed finish. Once you've done both sides, you can just take your hands and start to rub the ends of the hair, and this is going to create more texture and a bit of a matted finish. It needs to really look untidy. And then before I apply some more hair to the front, I'm just manipulating the shape to give it a bit more of a Beetlejuice feel. Taking up some more of the chopped hair, I'm placing that directly on top of the Prozade so it looks as though the hair's growing out of the scalp. Now remember not to make this area too dense because it is supposed to look quite thin in this area and you may still see a little bit of the weft, so if that is the case and you're not happy with that, you can take the weft back a little bit further and instead do an extra layer of the thinning hair. You can see here why I've used a flesh coloured ball cap, because you are going to see the scalp underneath the thinning hair, and you can paint it white to begin with, but don't use anything like a grease paint because you're going to struggle to get the hair to stick to it. I'm going to use a grease paint to colour the hair in. You can use hairspray. I couldn't find the colour that I specifically wanted, so I decided to make some out of the grease paint. So I've mixed some shades together to create a bit of a mossy olivey green shade. This is the exact same technique I used for the Heath Ledger Joker last year. It's really effective and it's super easy to do at home. Again, I am colouring the hair to match that you can see in the movie after it's been colour graded. You can see behind the scenes of this makeup online, but it is very vibrant and I'm not entirely sure that those pictures haven't kind of been edited, so I wanted to match it to how we see it in the movie. So now I've coloured it, I'm just going in and tweaking it with my fingers. Because it's got a little bit of texture to it from the paint, it's now easier to mould and shape and tweak into the shapes that you want to create with the ends of the hair. At the very top you kind of want them to stand up a little bit and look a little bit spiky, but soft spiky. Once you're happy with the placement, just go over and spray it with some hairspray. Going back to my Krylon Supra Colour palette, I'm taking the white shade with a hint of the grey, mixing that together so we've got a slight off-white tone. And I'm stippling that all over the face and going up to meet the hair. Typically when people recreate the Beetlejuice look, they go for a clown white face and vibrant green hair. But when you actually look at the movie and look at the actual makeup, it isn't so vibrant. Everything's a little bit more muted because he's a poltergeist that's old and mouldy and a bit yuck. I've chosen grease paints for this because I don't want to set it in place, and the reason for that is because I want the skin to warm up the product and for it to almost start to crease and look lived in. That's why I'm also choosing to put it around the eyes. We are going to set it with an eyeshadow, but I'm not going to apply too much eyeshadow because I do want it to crease and just look very dishevelled. When I look at the makeup up close from the movie, I can see that the eyes aren't actually black, but more like a deep purple shade. So I've taken this kind of plummy shade and mixed it with a little bit of black, and that's given me the perfect tone to apply around the eyes. It's deep enough to make it look black like we imagine Beetlejuice's eyes to be, but a little bit more true to the movie, and if this was worn outside in the evening, it would look black. I'm taking a couple of eyeshadow palettes from Certify. I use these every Halloween. They have almost every single colour you could possibly need. So I'm taking a maroon shade similar to the grease paint that we first mixed with the black. I'm pressing that over everywhere first, and then I'll go in later with some black to deepen. Of course you don't have to do this, you can just do black circles around the eyes. It is completely up to you. Taking a larger brush dipped into a little bit of the same colour that we've applied to the hair, I'm using this to stipple around the hairline. Imagine when something gets mossy and it starts to creep across the surface. That's what I'm creating here. You may or may not have noticed that Beetlejuice actually has moss growing around his face, so think of this as the foundation for that. I'm now going in with a smaller brush with no product on it, and I'm starting to feather out the seam around the eyes because I don't want it to look like a stark circle. Having that kind of blended out smudgy feel just gives it a bit of a grungy, disgusting appearance. He is gross, and that's kind of what we need to start creating on the skin. Michael Keaton, who played Beetlejuice, was older than Jack is at the time, so he has a little bit more of a frown line going on. He looks a bit older. So I'm getting Jack to scrunch up his face so I can kind of trace where his natural frown lines are, and using a small amount of the maroon eyeshadow, I'm placing that into these frown lines. Now remember, this is a theatrical look. If you go too realistic and too fine with the frown lines in an evening setting where this will probably be worn, you will lose all that detail. So remember to go quite theatrical with it. To create a bit more of a sinister feel to the expression of the eyes, I'm lifting them on the outer edge ever so slightly, and now I'm creating some furrow lines across the forehead. This helps to give the illusion of a bit of a worn looking tired face. And you can start to see now where I hadn't blended out the edges of the ball cap where I got distracted talking to Jack. It is actually a bit more visible now because we're not setting that grease paint in place. It's going to start to move where I'm getting Jack to move his forehead up and down. It's creating a seam line, but it's actually going to work in our favour for this particular look because, as I said, it is a dishevelled look. So we want frown lines so we can allow this to work for us rather than against us. I'm using a fine liner brush to apply the eyeshadow into the grease paint, and then I'm tapping that in with a dry brush and then going in with a concealer brush that has a little bit of the base tone to it and tapping over the top, and this just softens the lines and allows them to blend a little bit better. Michael Keaton is a little bit weightier and older than Jack, so I need to subtly enhance the weight around the eyes. You either go full on heavy and super theatrical like I did with my Disney Witch, where it's really heavy on the highlight and the contour, or you go a bit more subtle, which I'm doing here, and tapping in a shape but then fading it out, so there's the illusion that the skin is not so taut around that area, but I don't want it to be too obvious because I just feel like with Jack's bone structure it wouldn't work too well. Moving on, I'm taking a stipple brush dipped into a small amount of black. You can do this with eyeshadow or grease paint. I'm using grease paint. And I'm stippling this on over Jack's stubble because I want this to look more intense. If you've seen the movie, you'll know, as I said before, he has a very unkempt look. And I think having the stubble was a very clever move. I think it really does give it that shabby, tired looking feel. Don't forget to also take that down the neck. You can use a slightly larger brush for this area if you want to make it easier on yourself. I will list the names of the palettes down in the description bar, but with this palette I'm taking the shade Moss, which I'm going to create these little squiggly lines coming out from the hairline along the forehead and down the sides of the cheeks. This is putting emphasis on the thick moss that's growing around his hairline. And you can see the colour that we've mixed up to put on the hair is a really great shade for the moss because the eyeshadow completely matches that tone that we've created. That's why I love these palettes that she's created at Certified, because she has literally all the shades you could need in these different palettes. Some of these lines should be a lot thicker than others. You don't want anything to be too uniformed. Make sure you're coming all the way down to the jawline, and don't forget to apply some around the neck as well. I'm also stippling some of that in the hairline to make some of that moss look more intense in other areas. Beetlejuice also has moss growing on his actual face around one side of his mouth. So apply a base layer of that colour down before you go in with some of the moss. Beetlejuice has really rotten teeth, so I want to make the opening of Jack's mouth a little bit darker, so I'm going in with a similar colour to the eyes but in a lipstick, and Jack's just going to pat his lips together to start darkening that, and we will just layer this as we go. Many of the images of Beetlejuice has a very slightly downturn outer corner to the lips, so I'm just deepening that on the outer corners, and it also makes it again look a little bit mossy and rotten. Taking some of the green shade that we applied around the hairline into the hair, I'm also going to use that to contour Jack's cheekbones around his hairline, and I'm also going to add some of that onto the actual face. Also, don't forget to cover the earlobes. Even though the hair comes down in front of them, the lobe should be poking through, so you do want to cover that. And also, you don't know if you turn to the side, you might find that your ears are on show a little bit more than you realise. Moving on to the application of the moss, we are going to take some spirit gum and apply that to the face and also around the hairline and down some of the little squiggles that we've applied. We went onto Amazon and bought some of the moss that you use for trees when you're doing that miniature landscape modelling. Ideally we would have had a colour that sort of sits in between the two shades that you get in the packet, but I didn't want to be too pernickety and sit there and cut them up and mix them together, so we just went with a brighter colour because I thought I can always mute it down a little bit. If this is an evening look, which it's likely to be since it's for Halloween, this isn't going to be as vibrant once it's no longer daylight. So I'm going in with a slightly darker shade of that mossy green and using a fluffy blending brush, I'm stippling over that to mute down the green, and actually it works quite well to have it slightly more intense on the face because that's actually how it looks in the movie. I'm applying some of that as it comes down the forehead, and I'm also applying that down the cheeks, a little bit on the neck, and once it's dried in place I'm going in to mute down that colour, and as you can see it looks much more effective once you deepen the colour. I decided to take some green and apply it above the brows. I just want to break up some of the white on the face and give it a bit more of a dirty down finish. So use what's left on the bristles to tap that across the furrow of the brow, a little bit on the bald cap area and some around the creases of the nose. I then decided I wanted to deepen that 5 o'clock shadow once the moss was on the face and some more of the dirtying down. I felt like it needed to be a bit more intense. And then to finish off the face, I just went in with a little bit of the black eyeshadow to diminish the creasing but also to deepen the eye sockets and the opening of the lips again. We didn't have any fake teeth for this look, but I do have something that's super effective. These are the Necessary Evil mouth effects from the Makeup Armoury, and we're using the browny yellow shade to really finish off the look.
It's showtime.